And the Lord gave me a vision for church. And I just started writing down 10 things that would happen if I were to, be a part of a church. This is what it will look like. And man, it's exactly what came to be over the next 8 years, 8.5 years.
Welcome to the Everywhere Podcast, a collection of interviews with leaders and pastors and everyday followers of Jesus who are living into the reality that Jesus changes everything, everywhere. Hey folks, thanks for checking out the podcast. I'm Ryan. Today I have the privilege and honor of sitting down with District Superintendent of the Pacific Oregon District, Pastor Brett Rickey. I knew Pastor Brett Rickey just a little bit while he was pastoring Highland Park Church of the Nazarene in Lakeland, Florida. He's got a great story and a really great perspective specifically around prayer and healing in our local churches. We cover a lot of bases on this conversation, and I hope you have a blessed time listening to it. Let's check it out. Well, Pastor Brett Rickey, how are you today, sir?
Doing great. Glad to be here.
So we're just going to spend some time talking about your call to ministry and various experiences as a pastor, and now what you're doing as a DS in the Oregon Pacific District. So tell us a little bit about your faith story.
Yeah. So, I grew up in a Nazarene pastor's home, and so it was a healthy experience for me. And my dad was, I was kind of a second generation family. I was 15 years separated from my older sister and brother and older brother. They were, almost out of the house when I was born. So
Oh, wow.
I had a run of the place, and mom and dad loved Jesus. And so whenever, I was in teenage years and thinking, is this real? I could see it in them. So their faith really helped me stick. And I knew that, parents in the church of my friends weren't always the same behind closed doors, but my parents were. And so that shaped me to know that their love for the Lord was something that was caught as much as taught. And so whenever I went to Southern Nazarene University, my dad moved every 4 or 5 years all around the country to different churches. And so we were in Texas, in Odessa, Texas, and went to SNU, and there was a management major, got my degree there, and met my wife, and we started off to try to, make as much money as we could, and then do that corporate life. She got a good job, I got a good job, and worked for Chrysler Credit, and she worked for KPMG, Pete Marwick, and then moved around a bit in accounting, her and for me, and ended up at Farmers Insurance and Claims Department for 8 years. And that was a really good job. And I thought, that's the company I'll be with for my career, because it was a good, they treated their employees right and paid well and all of that. So in my mid-30s or early 30s, I went to Promise Keepers Gathering of Men. And then I went back for about 3 years in a row, every summer, and they just kept having an effect on me. And when a million men gathered in Washington, D.C., I was there, and the Lord called me into ministry. At that moment, one of the speakers said, "Some of you will leave here and go into full-time Christian ministry." And I felt like arrows hit my chest from just like an air gun. It was a weird feeling. And so I called my wife and I told her, what had happened that day. And then I tried to play it off when I got home, like, maybe I heard wrong. Maybe this is I don't want to do this. I know what this looks like. I don't want to be in ministry. But the Lord did finally get his way, and I relented. So I'm a reluctant prophet. I don't want to do this, but I keep doing it, kind of thing. And so I was at that point, we were attending Tulsa Central Nazarene. That's where God had brought us in our career. And I talked to my pastor about the feeling I was having, and I was starting classes there at Oral Roberts University in town in Tulsa. And so he said, "Well, hey, I've got a place on my staff, and we would love for you to consider planning a church." And I said, absolutely not, because at that point I'd already a Sunday school class with young adults, and it was going quite well. And so the Lord had gifted me with a teaching gift, and I knew that part, but I didn't know what the rest of it would mean. And I thought, to be a pastor, you needed 4 walls and a gym. That's what I like, the gym, that the security of that. I had no idea what planting a church would look like. So when he and the DS got me they took me to a nice restaurant and asked me if I
way.
Yeah, they were at the Fountains, and Russell Human, he was the DS then, said, Brett, we would like you to consider planting a church. And yeah, no way. And they said, would you pray about it? And I said, well, yeah, okay. And I gave them a long deadline, 3-month deadline. I said, I'll let you know by July. And
Oh, wow.
so because I had classes going on, and I didn't want it. I just didn't want it. But on July 15th was my deadline. I was sitting at my table, kitchen table, working on something for a class and paper. And the Lord gave me a vision for church. And I just started writing down 10 things that would happen if I were to, be a part of a church. This is what it will look like. And man, it's exactly what came to be over the next 8.5 years, out of what would be called Family Church. And it's now Core Church. We kind of merged and remerged after I left. And but it was an amazing journey. And so we had about 80 folks from the launch team from Tulsa Central Church, and our first Sunday we publicized it and invited and done all the stuff in a 6th and 7th grade center building, and we had about 200 people on our first Sunday, and then we waited a month because we were told you should wait a month and do preview services, and we had another 200 people the next month, and the third month we started about a couple hundred people and then dropped down to about 150, and then grew from there. And so it was an amazing 8 years. And so when God called me to leave in 2009 to Highland Park, to an existing church where they did have 4 walls and a gym, it was a whole different animal with a large staff and great people. It was fun, but it was challenging, a different kind of challenge. And it was also a ripping away from the family that I had built in Tulsa. So yeah, I mean, that's
yeah. What were some of those 10 things that you wrote down? Do you remember?
Oh, yeah. Part of it was, just that we would be the kind of church that it became. It was a church that would reach people that aren't being reached. Church for disenfranchised, for the lost, least, and left out. Part of the ministry of that church became, through God's providence, we reached one person who was a white-collar cocaine addict. And once he came to Christ, he ravenously read the New Testament, and about 6 months in, asked how could he help people like him. And I was just going to lunch with somebody else about starting a Celebrate Recovery ministry, and the guy I was taking lunch wasn't interested. And I said to this man on the phone, I've got a packet of information I think you might be interested in. And so he took the Celebrate Recovery stuff and ran with it. And by the end of 3 years, we were busing in 60 minimum security prisoners to our facility on Saturday night for Celebrate Recovery. Up to 200 people came. So part of our vision, that was one. Another one that would be a multiplication church that would give birth. And year 7 we did plant a church out of our church. It was Connection Church. Before we had a building, we had a baby. So it was nice to start doing those things. And we would, the contemporary model of music and all that kind of stuff was just coming out, and that we would make sure that we focused on that. And there were just different things like that. I can't remember all of it, but
sure.
Yeah.
And I've heard you in some other interviews and settings talking about the importance of prayer and healing ministry.
Yes, yeah,
that's something you don't I don't know. I feel like it's kind of spotty in different churches that you go to, especially healing ministry, because for
Yeah,
some people there's baggage when you hear that term.
yeah.
Um, Talk about the development of that for you, because it seems to be like something we need to recapture across the board.
Yeah, it was actually, it was one of those things that the Lord spoke to me personally about after a couple of times. Mindy and I, just in our Sunday school class, we would pray for people for different things. And for instance, we prayed for the couples, three couples in our class all at once. They were young adults to get pregnant. And the next month, like 3 out of 4 of the couples that we prayed for that were having trouble getting pregnant got pregnant. And then we prayed for different physical illnesses to be healed, and they were healed. And then the Lord was like, Brett, you have a healing gift. I need you to learn how to, what this is about.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's in the Bible. It's part of the church. One of the spiritual gifts that God gives to the church to reveal His power to the world. So I'd read various books on, John Wimber's book on power healing. He started the Vineyard movement,
Mm-hmm.
and that had gotten taken a little bit way out there. And what I wanted to do was, I heard from a friend that had attended a church called James River Assembly of God.
Mm-hmm.
He said, I went to James River and they had like a healing line during the worship, during the music. And I said, well, we can do that.
Yeah.
So, like from week one, I just got up on the mic and just said, hey, we're going to sing some songs here for a little while. And we used to sing for 25 minutes in a row, kind of thing. And I said, but while we're singing, we're going to be praying over here. And if you've got a physical need or any kind of need, just come over here, and Mindy and I and another one or two on the prayer team will pray for you. And so that's what we did. And so, it started off with 2 or 3 people would come, and it was off to the side of the stage, really kind of, out of the way. But over time, what happened was God continued to answer those prayers. And it was honestly a surprise when He did not say yes. So there was a momentum built of faith. People were like, man, if we bring them to church, God's going to touch them. And it wasn't kind of weird. People weren't falling down or anything like that.
Right.
It was just done in a very respectful way. And it was just another way for God to get the glory for what He was doing and allow the church to be the church. And in an age of medicine. And part of the cool thing, I had one of my friends that was a doctor. He's a gastroenterologist. He early on, he said, I didn't believe in physical healing, divine healing, until I went to Guatemala on a mission trip. He said, I thought it was kind of like hokey because I believed in science and I believed in medicine, but I didn't believe that God intervened except through those means. And when I went to Guatemala and I went up in the mountains where these people don't have anything, no access to medicine.
Right.
And I watched God work and heal people of things that couldn't have been healed by any other way. It changed my whole paradigm. So I had him get up on a Sunday and talk about his journey from, science to science plus faith, because, God can heal through science, obviously, and through medicine, and He does. So it was kind of cool. That built the faith of the church. And so we said, God heals through all means. Like, do not stop taking your medicine. Keep going to your doctor. But let's pray for things. And we know that sometimes God says no, and people you pray for do die. But let's give God a chance in the process to do what He may want to do. He may want to intervene. And we pray the prayer of faith for everybody that asks. So, I don't think it's like if somebody doesn't get healed, we don't blame them for their lack of faith.
Yeah.
That's heaping guilt and condemnation and shame. And that's not what Jesus did. So anyway.
Why do you think that some churches are so hesitant to do things like healing services, or it just doesn't even pop into our mind? I mean, I'll be honest, I until I'd heard that interview with you, it was something I'd never even really thought about. Like during a worship service, we'll have this space over here, this time to be able to do that. Why do you think that's not something we see in more churches?
I think it's a hesitance to get. It's that, they've seen it done weird, and honestly, I think some pastors don't want to be disrespectable or unrespectable. What's the word? They want to be like thought of as like, we're not those kind of Christians.
Right. We don't do those kind of crazy things and gold
Right.
dust and all this
Yeah,
kind of
but
stuff. Right.
I think what changed me early on was one of my professors said, "What did Jesus do when he went around? He went around preaching, teaching, and healing."
Absolutely. Yes. Yep.
So if that was his ministry model, then as a church, why not follow it? And so that was how I took it to mean like, all right, this is ours. Like we in Nazarene circles, we preach the kingdom
Yeah.
because that was his message. But it would be cool, I think, to return to his method as well, which was when they were sick. I mean, we're really big about going to the sick and going to the forgotten. But let's do what he also did. And he touched and believed that there would be change in their life, not just leaving them in their sickness. So I think there's it's not just going and being Jesus to the people. It's like getting Jesus in the people, it's so there's a both and I think we need to remember the power of Jesus that can transform their life now. We don't have to wait. We don't have to just give them a band-aid. We can give them the actual, the healing solution. So
that's powerful. Yeah, I have in my Bible next to some of those in the New Testament passages where you're just highlighting preaching, teaching, healing, preaching, teaching, healing. That seems to be core to what Jesus did. And man, that's good. That's a good note. Thanks for that.
let me add that
Yeah.
even Lazarus died again.
Yep.
So I don't put it up there with salvation or anything else. It is a sign of the power of God for those who are suffering. But we understand the ultimate healing, obviously, is life with Christ eternally. And so, nobody had more faith to be healed than Lazarus, and he died.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. No, thanks for that. And so and so by the time you left your church in Oklahoma, how big was did you have a staff?
yeah, we had staff. We had staff about 6 people or so. We were about 800 folks on a Sunday, and then we went to Highland Park, which was more than that, and it was about double that staff size, and so it was a bigger church. We had about 1,500 on weekends there, and then it grew from there for over 13 years that I was pastor, and then COVID hit, and then all bets were off, right? And
yeah. Well, let's spend some time with Highland Park. It's the one that I'm probably most familiar with just because of my context growing up in Lakeland. Let's talk about some of like when you came in, what were some of the things that you saw immediately that were like, okay, these are some of the things that the church is doing well. These are the things we need to focus on to help move that ball down the field. I think it was you in a sermon I heard. It may have been the sermon when you announced you were moving on to take the call to be a DS. Like a lot of the pastors who had been at Highland Park ended up becoming DSs.
yeah.
And then also the church had experienced this incremental growth over time. It was a church that really knew how to move the ball down the field. What did you see early on when you got there? They're like, okay, this is where we need to head.
Yeah, I feel like I was blessed. I had a good setup. Larry Leonard did a great job for 8 years of building trust in ministry, and he followed 6 years of Larry Dennis, who built trust in ministry, built trust in the pastoral role, who followed 4 years of Don Wellman doing the same. Don Wellman was at the end of his career, and so they had 3 really solid pastoral leadership model people before me. And the people at Highland Park had tended to be cooperative, pro, what do we need to do to reach people? So they had that DNA. So, and then when I got there, they were running with an executive pastor model and a very new staff. Like a lot of the people that I had inherited on staff had been there less than a year.
Oh, wow.
And they're people that were very highly competent. and that seemed to fit well initially. I think as time went by, we began to see some of the cracks and differences, but initially, I think it was a good fit, staff and pastor wise, and we were able to kind of, in any pastoral change, there's usually a year or so where some people are going to leave because you're not the last guy,
Right.
and I didn't scratch that itch. But then new people are going to show up because you're not the last guy. All right, and so there's a little bit of that, okay, let's try something new. And so I was able to do some of that and focus just on, being who I was and seeing what was needed at the moment, and moving in the way that I move and lead, which is way different than Larry. And Larry Leonard is, we have way different styles of leadership, and both are good, but both are different. And, you'd have to see it at work to notice what it is. But I think both are bathed in prayer, and it just comes out of the personalities that God has given us. And so I would say both of us have are very focused on reaching people far from God with the good news. Mm-hmm. We both want to get people saved, and that never went away. Larry Dennis was the same way. And so when that's your number one, everything else is number two. God tends to honor that, and so then your methodology reflects that priority, and
right.
You learn from everybody. You say, okay, God, who's doing that right now? In other contexts, how does that fit in Lakeland? What can we learn, and what's different about Lakeland that we could actually, go back in time and do some things that worked 20 years ago other places, because Lakeland's a little bit of a bubble,
Yeah, talk to me a little bit about Lakeland. So I would love to hear your perspective on that town and the ministry that you felt like Highland Park provided for that area at that particular time to provide for that growth, because it is a very specific kind of area. At least I feel like it is. Now that I'm in Chicago, Lakeland feels very specific.
Yeah, I think we benefited by being close to an Assembly of God university, and the president, Kent Engel, a good friend of mine, was part of our church for quite a while there, and so we had some students coming from the university, so that brought instant young life, and so we were a multi-generational church. That helped. Mm-hmm. Having a ton of kids in so we had just, from a sports ministry standpoint, we ministered to 5,000 kids on the weekend through sports ministry that weren't always a part of our church. So that was we had a lot of community connections that were being made. So we were trying to be the kind of church that would be noticed if we weren't there, not just a Sunday morning church. So we were very much active 24/7. I think the building was in use all the time with our preschool, and it was really noticeable during COVID when we weren't. And I think that was our goal, whether through whatever 501c3s we could partner with in the community that were giving help and hope to the area. So I think Lakeland in itself is a more conservative area, still part of the Bible Belt, if you will, where it's not, people aren't as hesitant to an invitation to church, maybe. But that's changing pretty quick with all the move-ins. Everybody's moving to Florida, so bringing different ideas. So yeah, it's definitely different than Chicago area, though. In upper Midwest is a little more hard ground, I would believe.
It has been. It's been an interesting shift. I grew up in Lakeland and I lived there with my wife, in one 10-mile radius, was born, raised, married, had kids, did ministry, for 33 years before we moved up here. And I appreciate Lakeland a lot. I appreciate the Chicagoland a lot as well. It's a more diverse area. I feel like you encounter a lot of non-Christians, definitely not a very conservative area as well. But every now and again, I have those moments of, Lakeland had a nice beat to it. It was a good time there. I treasured my time.
Yeah, there's a lot of churches there for sure.
Oh,
Comparatively,
yes.
Oregon and Chicagoland, it's same kind of deal. There's just not as many churches here.
Yeah, what's the what do they have the demographics of like how many registered Christians there are in your area? Like, do you know the percentage or anything like that?
I think from where we are in Oregon now, I think it is the least churched state in the U.S. That's
Yeah,
that's what I understood when I moved here. So, and that would play out. People still go to church. There's very pockets of conservatism, if you will, in religious ways. It's just the extremes seem to be more extreme. But don't believe what you see on the news. I think the rioting in Portland is not the norm. This state is it's a great state. The people here, here's the difference. In Lakeland, people pretend to be nice, you know,
Yes.
but in Oregon, they really are nice. So
I'm so glad you said that. So
yeah,
like, yeah. So all right, so two things. So when we told our family we were moving up to Chicago, friends and family were all like, you're either gonna get shot or freeze to death. So good luck. It's gonna be awful. and and we're in Chicago land, so I'm actually like 45 minutes from the city,
right.
in Mundelein here. But even when we've gone into the city, everybody every now and again I get these texts. It was like, have you heard about this, and this going on? It's like every city. There's ups and downs. There's certain areas not to go into. But one of the things I encountered in the Midwest ethic and attitude was, yes, I grew up with the Southern Belle charm thing.
Right.
That was not here. People were actually very honest, blunt, and kind for real to your face. There's not a whole lot of behind the scenes stuff going on. And that was a little hard to adjust to.
They'll tell you the truth, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And they can sniff out if you're like trying to, I don't know, butter them up or trying to get into a conversation. Just tell me what you're thinking, Pastor. I'm like, oh, okay, all right. I'm not used to that.
Yeah, yeah.
So it was beautiful. How about some lessons that you learned at Highland Park? Some vital lessons in leadership that were really important for you and that you've kind of carried with you.
Good and bad.
Yeah,
Because I did not lead perfectly through the whole process. I'll say that.
sure.
So, the thing that you must do, and if you want God to move in your church, is you've got to stay connected to Him, and you've got to stay away from sin. I mean, I know that sounds silly, and yeah, no kidding, but I mean, there are so many ways to allow the enemy in and to push God out of your life.
Yeah.
When everything begins with prayer, and everything begins with hearing the voice of God saying, "This is the way, walk in it." So when you're starting a major initiative, when you're thinking about the next sermon series, I mean, I know God works through electionary, and some people are cool with that, but I never had any ability to follow like something that, like it just, for me, it was just too hard because I knew what God had placed on my heart was pretty, time specific usually.
Yeah.
Like context specific, what was going on in the world, what was happening in our church body. And I know that God can still use those passages that, and I get it. Some guys and gals are able to do that. I wasn't, but it was through the connection that I had on a daily basis. So my discipline is the 1-year Bible. And then I journal through my prayers just to write them down. Bill Hybels wrote a book called Too Busy Not to Pray a lot of years ago that convicted me into journaling a prayer. I think about 20 years ago he wrote that, and it came out of his own failure as a praying pastor. And so I know that when we were able to take new ground as a church, it was because I, as a pastor, was praying. I was confident in where God was leading us to move. And I know when we lost ground or when we were floundering, there were times in my life personally where it wasn't that my prayer life wasn't what it could have been. I was uncertain, just wasn't moving with God like I should. And you can, in ministry, there are seasons like that where you go, man, I'm just so busy, or I'm so distracted, or you allow maybe the siren song of whatever else is out there to get your attention instead of focusing on the sheep that are with you. You know, you get burdened by the people that have left you. I know that used to hurt me a lot, you know, like, why did they leave me, and why did they leave our church, and how can I get them back? Instead of just love the sheep that are already in the fold, and then pursue the lost sheep, you know, that have never been in the fold. I would get consumed sometimes with those that were good friends that were going to the church down the road, you know, and it wasn't competitive. It was more of a personal, kind of woundedness. Like, man, especially the longer you're at a place, that got more painful to go to Walmart or Publix and see those former attenders. And you kind of wave at them in the aisle, and they didn't want to look at you. And those are the hard places in ministry. But I know that through prayer and connecting with the Lord, He would kind of work me through that. So that to me, that's just staying connected to God is the number one focus on how I was able to navigate through good and bad times. And when I wasn't, then usually bad followed. And when there were a few times where the difficult times came to our church through no fault of bad decisions. It's just the fact of life that when you have a church, any kind of church of any size, there are seasons of attack that you have to live through as a leader. You have to withstand it's like the rain. You got to put up the umbrella, and you have to refuse to curse those that are cursing you. And there were seasons like that where people were coming after me on social media. They were sending me emails of why I was wrong for this or that. And they were believing lies about me, about decisions I'd made. And I couldn't defend myself, because to defend myself would have been to betray a confidence of an employee. So I had to just kind of take it and rely on the Lord to be my defender or defend the church. And there was a season where a lot of people left because they heard part of the story, but not all the story. And I had to say, okay, Lord, these are your kids. I trust you. And, the Lord did restore, and He restored me. He restored the body. And a lot of those folks went to another church, and it's okay. I mean, they're still part of the church, just different address. So sometimes you have to get through those seasons of what did I do? And sometimes you didn't do anything wrong. It just happens.
I imagine that's harder. It's harder when you didn't do anything. It's just the nature of a situation that occurred, rather than, okay, I can pinpoint exactly what this is. And instead of having to rest in the fact that people are people, they're going to make the choices that they make. And that's good. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
And so before we talk about your move then to the role of DS, because that was a reluctant one as well, if I remember correctly, listening to you, you were kind of starting to, at your time at Highland Park, develop a leadership mentality and a development mentality of leaders around the country and folks that you knew. I went to a Accelerate conference that you have, which I thought was just awesome. And just so we're clear, I would love for somebody to do that again. Work that out. Talk a little bit about that mode, that direction you went.
Well, as a I was invited into a cohort with Kevin Myers, which is a pastor at 12 Stone Church in Atlanta at the time, and they were a very, very large church, and 24,000 folks on a Sunday. And so I'd never seen an operation like that. And so he invited us to come twice a year for 2 years, and for 2 days for he and Dan Ryland to mentor us. So I thought, why don't I offer that for churches that want to get to a certain level? And so I had 6 or 8 respond pastors that would come to Lakeland. We would put them up and pay their meals if they would come, and we'd spend an afternoon and a morning and just a real quick turnaround. And out of that group, I met Kevin Jack, who's now the pastor at Highland Park.
Love Jack.
And a lot of DSs now that are pastors, that were pastors, now DSs. It's amazing how God used that group of 6 of us or 7 of us to sharpen one another. So we came together. Actually, we came together for 3 years, and it was just a time to peer-to-peer learning. We talk about what's going on in our church. All the leaders were hungry to learn from one another. So then I started another one to expand in the rest of the country. I started with a group of 24 pastors of churches that were growing, and I enlisted the help of 3 other pastors. So we had 4 pastors, 4 different locations across the country, 4 meetings, and then that went well. So then I said, we're on to something. Peer-to-peer learning is the way to go. Instead of just a conference where a big head talks to little head in a seat, let's do peer, life on life learning. And so then, right in the pandemic hit 2020, we did our first conference called Accelerate, which was a teaching time on day 1. Day 2 was peer-to-peer learning, where pastors broke up into smaller groups and shared what's working, what's not working, how to improve. And we would have done more, but then pandemic stopped us, and then I made this move. So, but yeah, the reason is the reason that I did that was it was something that was not being done in the Church of the Nazarene, and it was a need, and the response from the pastors was amazing. Everybody to a person said, this is the best Nazarene thing we've been to. Thank you so much. And so that made me feel good. I do wish that we could do another one. And now as a DS, though, that's not my role. So hopefully another pastor will pick up the mantle. Kevin's thought about it, so we'll see.
Well, Kevin, if you're listening, I've already done a podcast with you. If you could just make that happen, bud, that'd be awesome. So good deal. And so the call you got to become a DS, another reluctant one, right? Yeah,
a little bit. It was time. It's never the role that I thought I'd be in, but as a district superintendent, it's a needed role. It's you support pastors in difficult times where they don't know what to do. They have a difficult question in their congregation. Sometimes, it's unfortunately a disciplinary issue that I have to be involved in. That's no fun. But then the fun part is hopefully getting to be a part of planting churches and matching pastors and congregations. And so that's the fun part when it happens. The difficult part is the recruiting part, finding pastors, period. It's a very shrinking pool of people that are willing to move anywhere, especially the Pacific Northwest. There's a little bit of a stigma attached, or maybe people don't want the cold. I don't know. So if anybody's watching and they're missionally feeling a call or a tug, you can get my email available at the end of this podcast. And so I welcome a resume.
And what is it about? So you've been in this role now for how long?
Year and a half.
What are some of the things that have surprised you about it?
What surprised me, I think there's more life in smaller churches in smaller towns than I anticipated.
Okay.
Churches that you would drive past and think, and look at, just looking at the exterior of the building, you can't judge a church by that. Some very, very talented leaders are serving in churches very anonymously. And I don't know that was a surprise. It was just it was a confirmation that God is at work in churches of all sizes through leaders. And that was kind of it was a beautiful thing really for me to see up close, because I only knew ministry from my context. And so, in a larger church setting, so to see God at work through all volunteers, no staff other than the pastor, and maybe sometimes the pastor is co-vocational. Mm-hmm. And to see what good God is doing. I've got one pastor, for instance, in Hood River, and his name is Kim Linder. And it's a church of less than 100 people, and probably 60 to 80 people. And he feels a burden to be co-vocational. He doesn't want to be full-time and necessarily, and he wants to be a high school basketball coach. And so he's been wanting to do that for 8 years. He finally got the opportunity to be the high school basketball coach at this Christian school. So he's become not only the basketball coach, but he started a Bible study on the campus, since it's legal there, and most of the kids that attend this Christian school, not all of them are Christians. And so he's got a Bible study for them. And now some of the kids are come to church. They weren't church before. And I think, man, that is amazing.
Yeah.
And, just the call that he's been feeling for 10 years, and it's taken him that long to get into school. But that goes over and above his call to be a pastor. I mean, it's like equal to. And just knowing that I would have never known his story. But that's so encouraging that God is at work in so many different kinds of churches that I was oblivious to before. So, yeah.
What do you think that says to the small church pastor? And by small church, like, what would you put the number on that? Because there's different, below 200, below, like, what would you say?
No, I think small church anymore, on our district, I don't know what small church is. I mean, we have a lot of churches under 25. So it's, you just, God is at work in everybody.
Yeah.
And so there are healthy churches and there are unhealthy churches. And so usually God's at work more in healthy churches where they're trying to, make disciples, and they're and willing to risk something to do that. And the unhealthy churches are usually just all about us and the gathering on Sunday and focused on the past and not the future. You can tell the difference, and that they can be of any size. I mean, we've got some larger churches that have worked through that whole focus on the past, and now they're open to the future. I think COVID kind of trimmed the branches of that, for Oregon especially. It's really hard on churches up here.
Yeah.
But yeah, small is it's like if you're a town of 4, like we have one church, it's a church of 30, but they're in a town of 400 people in the middle of the mountains. So that's actually a big church.
Yeah, they're doing great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Oregon.
Yeah. And that was also a shift for me moving up here. I had never been a part of a church that was less than 100 people.
Yeah.
And we're around 100. We've grown to about 125 or so. But I had to learn a lot about what God was doing in and through just volunteers and folks who they just needed to be activated. They needed somebody to say, you have gifts, you have calling. My job as a pastor is not just to preach, it's not just but to help walk alongside you and empower you, right?
Right.
And that was a huge, it's good stuff. If you had to think about kind of the future of what you see in the church, not just the Nazarene church, but just in general, where do you feel like, especially kind of seeing as much as you see from kind of a 30,000 foot view, where do you feel like the church is headed here in America that we need to be paying attention to?
Well, I think, even in our family, like I can just speak to that. The Church of Nazarene. I mean, I think we saw it at our General Assembly.
Yes.
I think we worked through. I think we worked through some of our global issues. if you were paying attention, it was a real together time in worship. And then by Monday, when we got down to business, it was like the division was clear.
Yeah, that was tough to see from afar. I only went for one day,
Yeah.
but watch a lot of it online later. But yeah,
It was pretty clear that there was a theological division based out of fear. It appeared to me, and I could be wrong, so just I'm not the Holy Spirit here, that there was one camp that was afraid that we might go the way of the United Methodist Church and divide over sexuality and other social issues, and a group that was really maybe pushing more toward a leftward leaning bent. And then most of those were the internationals that were wanting the more conservative. So I think, and then many in America that want to stay true to who we've always been.
yeah,
And then there's a group that's like, wait a minute, we want to be relevant and culturally relevant to the next generation. But I think there was fear based on a lack of knowledge. It wasn't, so I think for us is getting over the fear of change.
mm-hmm.
And because by Thursday, I think we've kind of worked through that. Like, wait a minute, we don't actually hate each other. We're actually all in the same team. We're going the same direction. We might think a little bit differently on some issues, but we're not that far apart, actually. And there's no big boogeyman that's trying to divide us, other than the enemy, obviously. But I mean, there's no, like, the academics are not after the holiness people. I mean, we're all together. So it was nice that we kind of came back. But there was a big dip and a big divide. And I think what we need to guard against is, this is personally what I'm seeing, is in each church, each local church, the factionalization over the left-right divide that we see in the world everywhere. I mean, if you go to go to Great Britain, England, that same thing's happening. I mean, the people that want immigration, the people that don't want immigration. You go to the EU, the same thing's happening. People who want immigration, that don't want immigration, it's 50-50. All around the world, issues are split down the middle, 50-50. It's not just America that's politicizing things. It's the world that is divided. And our church was participating in that. And God and the Holy Spirit brought us through that. I think if we can cooperate as a group with the Holy Spirit, any church that does that can build unity around that. Identify the dividers and say, okay, we're not going to divide on that issue. We're going to let the Holy Spirit rule here. And here's how he does it. And we're going to think differently on these things. And that's okay, God says, and I think we'll be all right. So that's just me talking off the cuff about what I observed because I did come away from General Assembly hopeful, whereas in the middle of it I was like, oh boy, we're kind of in a mess here. This is not very happy.
Now it seems like unity is something that not uniformity, but unity. Every local church needs to be striving to continue to kind of pull back together as the world seems to be becoming more and more divided.
Right.
Yeah, thank you for that. Well, hey, thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. I've enjoyed getting to know you a little bit better again. So not so from afar, although we're far away now over Zoom.
Yeah.
So any lasting things you want to say to anybody watching this? You want to give your email? Anybody who's interested in coming out to the beautiful Pacific area?
Hey, that's not a bad thing. Brett, Rickey, B-R-E-T-T, Rickey, R-I-C-K-E-Y at ORPAC, ORPAC.org. You can just email me and just let me know what you're thinking and where you want to serve, and maybe place, who knows. But not only that, I want to, one thing to share, last thing to share. I am very hopeful in the post-pandemic church that what has happened in Europe, I know that, the fear is that what's happened in Europe will happen here. And that may be, I don't think it has to be. I think the social changes that are globally happening can shift. I think we can be the exception in some ways. So I haven't given up on the church yet. And I think we're post-Christian. I post a lot of things, but I also know that when a local church becomes intentional, that still meeting about reaching lost people and going into the community and getting Jesus to the people and getting the people to Jesus, that results in a healthy church body and a growing church body. It still happens. I've seen it here in Eugene, where, this is supposed to be where churches go to die, but I've seen growing churches here. It's happening at City First Church right downtown, the Nazarene Church. So I just keep up the good work, man. If you think it can't be done in your town, ask God if He's done. And until He says it's done, then it ain't done. So be encouraged.
I love it. Thanks so much for your time, Pastor.
Hey, God bless.
Thanks for checking out this podcast. I hope this interview was a blessing to you. Like, share, subscribe, and get the word out. And let's indeed follow Jesus everywhere.